When I'm working with gold and I want to solder my ring shank to an element, this is what I will normally do. I need to make sure that my heat doesn't touch my solder seam because I don't want my ring shank to split. So I would normally use yellow ochre, and this is yellow ochre water-based paint. Just put some on all the sides. And this is a heat blocker. So yellow ochre is really good for anywhere that you don't want your heat to touch. Other things you can use are Tipex. You can also use Jeweler's Rouge. So I don't want this anywhere out because I want the heat to flow. So I do need to make sure I'm really neat with my yellow ochre on where I'm putting it. So now I've got my yellow ochre and I've filed a flat top on my curved surface, and I've filed a flat bottom on my shank here. I'm going to use my third arm and put everything together. Before I do that, I mustn't forget to put some borax. I'm using my borax dish and borax cone. You can use your liquid if you like. I'm using my third hand. I just want to make sure it's all in place. I've now put my ring together, so I've got my yellow ochre at the top where my solder seam is. I've got my borax, and now I'm just going to put a pillion of solder on either side. I like to use pillions, but I know some people like to bead their solder, but either method works really, really well. I'm using 9-karat gold hard solder. You can also use easy solder for this. So if you've done your shank in hard solder, you can then move down to easy solder if you want. But I personally like to use hard solder throughout. I just find I just prefer that. That's my choice. Now I'm going to heat my whole ring up, and I'm going to solder my shank to my element. And when you're working with 9-karat gold, it is slightly harder to work with than silver. So you have to heat your piece really, really well. Make sure, remember, that your solder doesn't jump, and if it does, don't worry, just wet and reposition. So with silver, don't forget, you have to heat up the whole piece. It just makes it a bit more easier. But with this, if you notice my gold, I'm going to heat the whole piece, and then I'm going to really focus on my element and the shank part at the bottom. So as I'm heating up, you're going to see my gold, it's going to change into a red colour. I've moved up to a bigger torch because the torch I was using actually was a fine torch, which is really good for tiny elements, but just something like this where I've got a larger surface area to work with, the bigger torch will help me heat my piece much quicker. So I'm checking my other side as well, making sure everything has soldered. As soon as it solders, you take it away. So gold is a lovely material to work with, but the only difference is when I'm heating it, I heat the whole piece, then I really do try and focus on the element and the shank that I'm working, which will be there. And if you can see, the yellow ochre has dried, but as soon as you decide to put that in water to cool it off, that will disappear because it's a water-based paint. It'll leave no residue at all.